so many ridiculous issues with like gun violence and things like that, you know. We're pretty happy that we've got our kids out of the public system right now, no offense, but weaponry in schools is just not a thing that we want to deal with. $26? Yeah, well. Also depends on where you get it from. Because if I'm gonna just be looking for something quick, I'm looking for a sandwich vendor. Okay, so we're gonna go with Nep's question from above, which is, how exactly do we work with like trigonometry in general? So there are two approaches that generally will work. They're often called the right triangle trigonometry approach and the unit circle approach. I like to use both. Not less than $20. Yeah, it can happen. Okay. So the way that we work this out is that we say, if we're going to look at any, you know what, let's back up. Braylon. I'm going to tell you this, man. That man does not want anything except anything that makes himself look good and enrich himself. He does not care about anyone or anything else, I promise you. He did not care about anyone or anything else but himself in the 60 plus years that he's been doing anything in the public eye. I promise you. Okay. If we back up to this, and if you're like, oh, you must be for Biden. No, not really. I just, no. A piece of bread would be better than that guy for president. TFG, man. All right. So geometrically speaking, what we had going on for a long time here is that the ancient Greeks were looking at, like, how do we formalize geometry? And so this is really what Euclid was all about, was trying to say, let's formalize all of our mathematical concepts. And so Euclid, his job was to start with, I don't have the elements with me, it's packed. The basic geometric principles start with, what are some of the most basic things we have? So, most basic thing we have is just a point. So something which has no other dimension or no real dimension to it, just an object in space. It has no length, no width, no breadth, nothing. Right? And then if we add another point in space, this allows us to then build a line between those two things. Now, in Euclid's day, a line actually just meant the segment that existed between these two things. In our modern parlance, we also just extend that infinitely in both directions. In his day, that wasn't really what it was. It was just that you draw the line between those two things and you stop. Okay, and then by building out a third point with another line, right? Again, either infinite or just contained, doesn't really matter. you form a set of angles. Euclid also proved then, and this was probably proven well before his time, proved that the vertical angles, the angles that are opposite each other in this diagram, are going to be equal to each other. And that you can get 180 degrees split between the two lines, the two angles along any one line. So, got that, 180 degrees going that way, 180 degrees going that way, diagonal 180 degrees going that way, 180 degrees going that way. So, it's all the same stuff there. Yikes. Yeah, I'm waiting for that bubble to burst. We just sold our house, so like, it's official, it's done. We now have the money in our bank account, which, I gotta say, looks pretty good. My spouse goes onto our investment accounts and looks at the amount that's in our account and is like, we're going to transmit this amount of money into this investment account. And we're like, that's a really big number. So we have left the United States. We're currently in England. I mean, I think you knew that. But yeah, we're not permanently leaving. We're planning on coming back after 3 years. We'll see how things go. But we want our kids to do their we want our kids to do the rest of their school in America, but question mark. We'll see how things go in the next 3 years, and if they're both like abso-effin-lutely not, then we'd just stay here. Well, yes, but that's the other thing, Brendan, is that, again, we're still making U.S. money while living here. So... sort of. I mean, she's got a pretty much guaranteed job as long as, like, can't get into it too much, but yeah. Well, then let's make it better. Alright, so we've got our lines with points. We've just created angles. I'm also going to recommend this to everybody. It is currently getting worse, I will guarantee you, but that is also mostly because we are not standing together, banding together, and actually figuring this stuff out. Everybody's like, oh no, we're all separate from each other. Help, help. Somebody. And then somebody went out there and decided to throw you a bone without actually giving you anything of substance. Right? If you want to be ruled by fear, certain people are very happy to do that. Yep, and there are a lot of places that are trying to prevent homelessness and trying to help out people with that. Okay. So we're forming these angles, and Euclid's major Euclid's major contribution, no, that's a lie. Um, Descartes' major contribution to this was to say, hey, I noticed you guys have a lot of, and it wasn't even Descartes necessarily, but Descartes came up with the Cartesian coordinate plane, and he said, like, we can get a lot of this stuff that we've got, and we can put it onto this coordinate plane. And in doing so, now we've got these XY coordinates that we're working with. Certain other people who are working on trigonometry were then going to say, okay, now that we've got a coordinate plane with the Cartesian coordinate plane, we can now formalize geometry by into the Cartesian plane by saying, let's take the one part of this angle that we really want to standardize and put it smack dab in the middle. Yes, that's right. This is going to be our vertex. So our vertex gets placed from just this random point out in space to the origin point. And our second, that's terrible. Let's pick a color that's more obviously different. Nope. A. Let's take our second point, and we're going to put that somewhere along the x-axis. This is going to be a standardized line then. This is going to be our initial side, which is then going to be just wherever we put this thing. We say, okay, it's going to be the line or the ray, if you want, that connects our vertex to whatever standardized position we're using along that initial side. Okay, and then we're going to take, man, we're going to take this point here. That's not helping. And we're going to stick that out in space. It's going to open as far as it needs to get to that particular angle. To make that particular angle. So this size now here becomes this size here, and it is directed, which means that we're going to choose a particular direction to move in. So counterclockwise is going to be our positive direction for our angles. They will always open that particular way. Now this is what's called the terminal side. Will terminate along a particular radius. We're just going to have it be equal to 1. So we have a radius of 1 on this particular unit circle at a particular location, x comma y. Okay. And then when we draw these in, okay, and then we have particular locations, which are going to be on the circle. And this makes it real easy to find, again, locations for all these things. So if we have a radius of 1, if we're just going to the right, yeah, that's to the right. Sorry, I'm backwards. So if we go to the right, I got to remember, this is like me standing up in front of a room. So when I was teaching my students, I was always doing things opposite the way that I normally want to do it. And so it makes it a little more obvious. Anyway, yeah, so we're moving to the right 1 and having the edge of the circle over there. That's 1, 0. Our vertex, our center, is at 0, 0. It's the origin point. Of course it is, right? If we then go up, that's 0, 1. To the left is -1, 0, and down is 0, -1. So, easy enough. Okay, then when we do that, we say, okay, if we want to be at any particular angle, just off in space, right, what are we going to do in order to find those positions, those XY coordinates at any of those particular locations? Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit maybe trickier, maybe harder. We'll see how it goes. So the easiest places to find angles, and really we should back up a little bit and say, okay, what are angles going to be in this particular setup? Well, if we go back to ancient Babylon, the way that they had set up angles was that they wanted to start with a circle and say, like, okay, how many ways can we split this circle up in order to allow us to see, you know, small gradations of movements around the circle. And so their natural choice was their base. They said that, okay, here we're going to have a, like, no angle. That's fine. Don't worry about it. We won't call it a number. We have no angle. And then if we open further and further and further, we're going to have all these different possible angles. If we make it all the way back around, this should be 3600, which is 60 times 60. Their base is 60. This created a bit of a problem because 1/3600th of this circle is really hard to draw. It is in fact smaller than that distance between those two lines that you can see there by a significant margin. It's like less than a quarter of that. I don't know exactly what it is, but yeah, like that distance between those things, it's really small. It's not going to work very well. So they were like, all right, let's just make it that. So they took a factor of 10 out of them. They said, okay, it's... Well, it made sense because their base was base 60. Where are my books? I don't have my cuneiform books. But in cuneiform, right, the way to draw the numbers was to put stacks of... I actually did this, by the way, with a triangular crayon and a glob of Play-Doh. I recommend this. But you take the triangular crayon, which you can get from #NotSponsoredCrayola, or some other company if you prefer. You can get triangular crayons. They're easier for little kids to grab. And they encourage correct grip a little bit better. So if you grab onto it and then instead of writing, right, you flip it around and put it in your thumb like this. Like grab it with your fist and then put your thumb on top. This makes a nice little stylus that if you have a glob of clay, you can tag them, sort of moving around and tapping the stylus into the clay, it can get you something that looks more or less like these things. So this is 3. Six. Oops. And 9. Eventually you start making like cross hashes like this, which go across it, and it starts getting you larger and larger numbers. It gets crazy when you start like doing all the numbers out. Eventually this goes to nope. Something like this, which was, this is the number of 1s, and this is the number of 60s that you have. So this one together is going to be 61. This one here, I don't even remember what this is. This is freaking crazy. But yeah, this would be like a bigger number, and it keeps going from there. Anyway, cuneiform. There was a problem here, because if you leave a certain amount of space between the number, it could be 61, or this could have been 60 squared, so this could be 3601, depending on the amount of space you left. Again, creates a little bit of a problem. So is it 61 or is it 3601? I don't know. So then when people actually started using, like, the Babylonians had a really good system of mathematics, and they taught mathematics to their scribes at a fairly high level. You know, compared to the ancient Greeks, they were pretty much on par. It's just that they didn't formalize their, like, proofs and stuff. Or at least not as much as the Greeks did. They were much more interested in finance and architecture than they were in theory. So the scribes and the architects were useful to doing this stuff. Yeah, right? Yeah, and then you got to put it on the tablet, and then you got to make sure you fire it in the kiln for a while, so when you take it out again, it's not going to just get smudged every time. Dad, come on. You put it in your pocket. I need to call Bathsheba. Good times. So they didn't know, like, what to do with this until somebody was like, hey, wait a minute. If we put a symbol in between, this is going to allow us to say this is just like a null space, an empty space. So in this case, this is definitely 60 squared. We have no 60 to the firsts, and then we have a 1. So this is definitely 3601. So the Babylonians didn't actually have a number for 0, but at least, you know, they figured out a way to make a 0 placeholder. It wasn't until the Indians eventually came up with the 0 number, also known as crap. I knew this. I swear I knew this less than a month ago. Friggin' A. Shunya. I didn't even actually get the thing up. There it is. Found it now. Yep. So there are... Yeah, okay. So 2 mathematicians are credited with the concept of zero, like coming up with the actual number, which again represents shunya, or the emptiness, which also can be thought of as a completion of the circle in samsara and becoming reborn again, things like that. As such, zero has a intimate relationship with infinity, the idea of infinity. The 2 people credited with the concept of zero are Aryabhata and Brahmagupta. So those are our 2 famous mathematicians from way back when. Who again generally get the most credit for coming up with the concept of zero itself. Okay, so instead of doing 60 times 60, which again gets us our 3600, they shortened it a bit and said, okay, we only need 360. We'll cut it by a factor of 10, and, you know, it works well enough. And in theory, you could also make it like 360.0, and then that would be able to, you'd be able to figure it out well enough. They never needed it to be as accurate as like tenths, just because like back then measuring instruments weren't really that precise. Yeah, they did okay, but when it came to like building astronomical devices and astronomical measurements, then they started needing like more exact angles. But generally speaking, you know, as close as they could be guaranteed to get, was starting to get into the like single, what we call single degrees. Okay, so that's 360 degrees. But here's the thing. It's kind of arbitrary. Shrug. Right? Like 3,600, 360, 5,000, like any number you want to pick, you could just pick a number for no particular reason or because you like it. If we base things off of this ancient Babylonian system, like, okay. Right, and this is also one of the reasons that I got so far into this, was because I was interested in math history and started getting into it and started telling students all the stories and stuff like that. And they were like, oh, well, this is really kind of cool. You know, it engages the students who are more interested in history than they are in mathematics. It engages the students who are interested in mathematics because they want to know the history behind everything. Even if they don't like history, they like mathematics. Sure, now they like the history of mathematics, which honestly was my in. I did not like history, generally speaking, because a lot of it, I have kind of the same feelings toward history as I forget who it was. There was a interview that was being conducted with Douglas Adams and Sir Robert Patrick, maybe, of the Royal Society, and he was saying